1683, the Ottoman Empire stood at the gates of Vienna. 600,000 square miles, 3 continents, 35 million people, the most feared military power on earth. The Sultan's treasury overflowed with gold. Silk Road trade filled the coffers. The Ottoman lira was trusted from Baghdad to Budapest. No one could imagine that in 200 years the empire would be bankrupt. Foreigners would control the economy. The Sultan would become a puppet. And the weapon that destroyed the Ottomans, not armies, not revolts, debt. This is the story of the Sultan who sold his empire. The Ottoman Empire, for 400 years unstoppable. 1520, Suleiman the Magnificent. The empire stretched from Hungary to Yemen, from Algeria to Iraq. Constantinople, the jewel of the East, was the richest city in the world. How did they do it? Simple, geography. The Ottomans controlled the trade routes. Every caravan from China carrying silk, every ship from India loaded with spices, every merchant from Africa bringing gold. They all passed through Ottoman lands. And they all paid taxes. The numbers were staggering. Annual customs revenue reached 8 million gold ducats. That's roughly $2 billion in today's money just from trade taxes. The treasury in Topkapi Palace held more than 18,000 pounds of gold stacked in rooms guarded by elite janissaries. The Sultan could afford anything. Mosques that touched the sky, palaces with marble floors, armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The janissaries, the elite infantry, were the best paid soldiers in the world. Each received 6 acts per day plus bonuses plus land grants. They were loyal because they were rich. Ottoman coins were pure. The acts contained 85% silver. The Sultani gold coin was 3.5 grams of pure gold. Merchants from Venice to Vienna accepted them without question. Why? Because they had real value, intrinsic value. Melt the coin and you still had precious metal. But more importantly, the Ottomans never borrowed. Never. Islamic law Sharia forbade riba, usury, interest on loans. It was considered a sin, a moral corruption, so the sultans operated on a simple principle: if you can't afford it, don't build it. Pay cash, no loans, no debt, no foreign bankers. This was their strength, their pride, their economic philosophy. It was also the seed of their destruction. Because when the money started running out, they had no financial infrastructure, no credit system, no experience with debt management. They were financially naive. And in the world of international finance, naive empires get devoured. The golden age was ending, but the sultans didn't see it coming. They saw the full treasury, the loyal armies, the vast territories. They didn't see the cracks forming beneath their feet. 1600, the first signs appeared. Dutch merchants found a sea route to India around the Cape of Good Hope. They bypassed Ottoman lands entirely, no customs, no taxes. Ottoman customs revenue dropped 15% in a decade. The sultans barely noticed. The treasury was still full, there was still gold, still plenty, but plenty doesn't last forever, and empires that don't adapt die. 1901, the Treaty of Karlovitz. For the first time in Ottoman history, they lost territory in a peace treaty. Austria took Hungary, Russia took the Black Sea coast, Poland took Podolia, Venice took parts of Greece. The Ottoman Empire, which had only expanded for 400 years, was now shrinking. But losing land wasn't the real problem. Losing revenue was. Hungary had been a major tax source, generating annual revenue of 1.2 million gold ducats. Gone. The Black Sea ports had generated massive customs income, 800,000 ducats annually. Gone. Within 10 years, Ottoman revenue dropped from 8 million ducats to 5.5 million, a 30% collapse. The expenses, they didn't drop, they grew, because the empire was now on the defensive. Defense is expensive. You need more forts, more soldiers, more weapons, more supplies. The janissaries demanded pay raises. They argued that they were fighting more wars and deserved more money. The Sultan agreed. Janissary salaries increased 20%. Provincial governors who controlled the countryside demanded subsidies, claiming their regions were being raided and needed money for defense. The Sultan agreed. Provincial subsidies increased 15%. The palace, the Sultan's household, kept spending on lavish weddings, new pavilions, and expensive gifts for foreign diplomats. Nobody wanted to cut spending. Everyone assumed the money would return. It didn't. The 1700s saw the bleeding continue. European ships now dominated global trade. The Portuguese controlled the Indian Ocean. The Dutch controlled Southeast Asia. The British were building an empire in India. The Silk Road, which had made the Ottomans rich for centuries, was becoming irrelevant. By 1720, Ottoman customs revenue had fallen to 3 million ducats, half of what it had been in 1600. The treasury was running out. The sultans tried everything to raise money. They debased the currency, mixed copper with silver. The axe went from 85% silver to 60% silver. Result, inflation. Prices doubled in 5 years. The people noticed. They protested. The coins are fake. The Sultan is cheating us. 1730, the janissaries stormed Topkapi Palace. They dragged Sultan Ahmed III from his throne and forced him to abdicate. The first sultan overthrown because of economic problems. The new sultan, Mahmud I, faced a nightmare. The treasury held only 2 million ducats. Annual expenses ran 4 million ducats. The empire was running a deficit for the first time in its history. His advisors gathered. The Grand Vizier spoke clearly. My Sultan, we have two options. Option 1, cut spending, fire soldiers, close forts, risk civil war. Option 2, borrow money from European merchants. Muhammad stared at them. Borrow? We've never borrowed. Islamic law forbids riba. The Grand Vizier nodded. Yes, my Sultan, but we can structure it differently. Call it a trade agreement. A commercial partnership, not a loan. Technically, it was a lie. Everyone in the room knew it. The Europeans would charge interest. They would call it administrative fees or processing costs or partnership dividends, but it was interest. Muhammad, I hesitated. His entire life he'd been taught that debt is slavery, the borrower is servant to the lender, but he was desperate. The janissaries were unpaid, the provinces were in revolt, the treasury was empty, and desperation makes you compromise your principles. 1740. The Ottoman Empire took its first foreign loan from French merchants in Marseille. Amount 1 million gold livres, interest 5% per year, repayment period 10 years. The contract was signed in secret. The religious authorities were not consulted, the people were not informed. It seemed small, manageable, a temporary measure. The French gold arrived, the janissaries were paid, the immediate crisis passed, but the door had been opened. And once you start borrowing, it's very hard to stop, because debt is like opium. The first dose solves the pain, but then you need more and more and more, and by the time you realize you're addicted, it's too late. At first, the loan seemed to work perfectly. 1741. The French gold paid the soldiers, funded repairs to fortifications, bought new cannons from European foundries. The empire stabilized, the crisis passed, the janissaries stopped rioting, but loans must be repaid. 1750, first payment due. 100,000 livres principal, 50,000 livres interest. The treasury didn't have it. Revenue was still declining, expenses were still rising. So they did what every debtor does. They borrowed more to pay the debt. Second loan from Dutch merchants, 500,000 guilders at 6% interest. The cycle had begun. 1768, war with Russia. Catherine the Great invaded Ottoman territories. The war lasted 6 years. Cost of the war reached 8 million gold livres. Ottoman revenue that year was only 3 million livres. The math didn't work, the treasury was drained. Soldiers went unpaid, supplies ran out. 1774, Treaty of Kusuk-Kainarka, catastrophic defeat. The Ottomans lost Crimea, which generated annual revenue of 400,000 ducats. They lost control of the Black Sea, which brought in 300,000 ducats in customs. And they owed war reparations to Russia totaling 4.5 million rubles. The empire was bleeding from every wound. To pay the reparations, they borrowed again from British merchants, £3 million at 7% interest. 1790, fourth loan from Austrian banks, $2 million at 8% interest. 1800, fifth loan from Italian merchants, 1.5 million ducats at 9% interest. Notice the pattern, each loan was larger, each interest rate was higher. Why? Because the lenders knew the Ottomans were struggling. Higher risk means higher rates. And the Ottomans had no choice, they were trapped. By 1820, the empire owed 50 million gold francs. Annual revenue stood at 40 million francs. They were spending more on debt repayment than on the military. Sultan Mahmud II, a reformer, tried to fix the problem. He modernized the army, abolished the janissaries in 1826, created a new European-style military. But modernization costs money, and the only way to get money was to borrow more. The 1820s saw the 6th, 7th, and 8th loans from British banks, French banks, and German banks. The empire became a regular client of European finance. Every year new loans, every year higher interest rates. By 1850 the situation was critical. Total debt reached 200 million gold francs. Annual revenue was 150 million francs. Annual debt payments for principal and interest totaled 35 million francs. That's 23% of the budget going to foreign bankers. Sultan Abdülmecid I knew the truth. His advisors showed him the numbers, the projections, the charts. The empire was insolvent, technically bankrupt, but admitting it meant surrender, meant humiliation, meant the end of Ottoman prestige. So he did what every leader of a failing empire does. He lied, he borrowed more, and he prayed for a miracle. The miracle never came. 1853, the Crimean War. Russia invaded Ottoman territories again. Britain and France, fearing Russian expansion, offered to help, but their help came with a price. British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston met with Ottoman envoy. His offer was clear: we'll send troops, we'll send ships, we'll save your empire, but you need to modernize, build railroads, telegraphs, factories. The Ottomans agreed. Yes, we want to modernize. Palmerston smiled. Excellent, here's the loan contract. £3 million at 6% interest. The Ottoman finance minister hesitated. My lord, we already owe too much. Palmerston's smile didn't fade. Don't worry, you'll win this war. Russia will pay massive reparations. You'll be rich again. You can repay everything. It was a lie, and deep down everyone knew it. But what choice did the Ottomans have? Russia was at their borders. Without British help, they'd lose everything. They signed. The war lasted 3 years. The Ottomans won, but Russia paid minimal reparations, far less than expected. And now the empire owed 3 million more pounds, 1858. Britain offered another loan for railroads to modernize, 5 million pounds at 8% interest, 1862. Another loan for telegraph lines, 8 million pounds at 10% interest, 1865. Another for port modernization, 6 million pounds at 12% interest. Do you see what was happening? Interest rates were climbing from 6% to 12% in just 7 years. Why? Because British bankers knew the Ottomans were drowning. High risk means high rates, and the Ottomans were the highest risk in Europe, but they couldn't stop. They needed the money for wars, for modernization, for paying old debts. They were in a debt trap, borrowing to pay interest on old loans. Classic financial death spiral. By 1870, the numbers were catastrophic. Total debt reached 242 million pounds. That's approximately $30 billion in today's money. Annual revenue was 20 million pounds. Annual debt payments totaled 14 million pounds. 70% of the Ottoman budget went to foreign bankers. Let that sink in. 7 out of every 10 gold coins collected in taxes went to Europe. The government couldn't function, couldn't pay soldiers, couldn't maintain infrastructure, couldn't administer justice. Provincial governors wrote desperate letters explaining they had no money for roads, for schools, for police, and the people were suffering. The Sultan's response was always the same. There is no money, everything goes to the debt. 1875, the final breaking point. Sultan Abdulaziz received the treasury report. His finance minister laid out the numbers. My Sultan, we have 3 million pounds in the treasury. Next month's debt payment is 4 million pounds. We cannot pay. Abdulaziz stared at the paper. His hands trembled. He had 2 choices. Choice 1, default, refuse to pay, declare bankruptcy. Choice 2, borrow more at even higher rates and delay the inevitable. He chose option 1. October 6, 1875, the Ottoman Empire issued a decree. Due to extraordinary circumstances, the imperial government suspends debt payments for 5 years. Translation, we're bankrupt, we can't pay, we're defaulting. It was the first sovereign default of the modern era. Newspapers across Europe exploded with headlines. The sick man of Europe collapses, Ottoman Empire bankrupt, sultans cannot pay their debts. The humiliation was total, the pride of 600 years destroyed, and then the vultures arrived. The European powers had a problem. The Ottomans couldn't pay, but the debt was owed to British banks, French banks, Austrian banks, Italian banks, and German banks. Thousands of European investors held Ottoman bonds. They demanded their money, but you can't invade a country just because they can't pay debt. That would be too obvious, too barbaric, so they did something worse, something more subtle, something more permanent: economic colonization. 1881, after 6 years of negotiations, the Ottomans signed the Muharrem Decree. Here's what it created. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration, known as the OPDA. A council of 7 members, 1 British representative, 1 French representative, 1 Austrian representative, 1 Italian representative, 1 German representative, 1 Dutch representative, 1 Ottoman representative. Translation, 6 foreigners, 1 Turk. And here's what the OPDA controlled. All customs revenue from Ottoman ports, all tobacco taxes, as tobacco was a major Ottoman product, all salt taxes from the salt monopoly, all silk taxes, all alcohol taxes, and despite Islamic prohibition, Christians drank, all fishing taxes, all stamp duties. In total, the OPDA controlled 30% of all Ottoman tax revenue. Think about that. 30% of every tax collected went directly to European bankers before the Sultan saw a single coin. Every ship that docked in Istanbul, every cigarette sold in Damascus, every fish caught in the Black Sea, every legal document stamped in Baghdad, the money went to Europeans first. The Sultan had become a puppet, his treasury a pass-through account, his empire a debt colony. But it gets worse. The OPDA had enforcement power. They stationed agents in every Ottoman port, every tax collection office. These agents, mostly British and French, watched every transaction. If an Ottoman official tried to divert money, the OPDA reported it to the European embassies, who then pressured the Sultan. The Ottomans had lost financial sovereignty. Example, the Hijaz Railroad, 1900. Sultan Abdulhamid II wanted to build a railroad from Damascus to Mecca for Muslim pilgrims. A religious project, cost estimate was 3 million pounds. The Sultan requested budget approval. OPDA response, denied, not commercially viable, not profitable. The funds should go to debt repayment. The Sultan protested, this is for religious purposes, for the faithful. OPDA replied that it was irrelevant and the debt comes first. The Sultan built it anyway using private donations from Muslims worldwide. But the point was clear. He needed permission from foreigners to spend his own money. Another example, education reform, 1908. The Young Turks took power. They wanted to modernize education, build schools, train teachers. Budget request was 2 million pounds. OPDA response, denied. Current revenues must service existing debt. No new spending. The empire couldn't even educate its children because foreigners controlled the money. And the cruelest irony, the debt never shrank. 1881 owed £242 million, 1890 owed £220 million with some principal repaid, 1900 owed £195 million, 1910 owed £180 million. In 29 years the Ottomans paid hundreds of millions in interest and principal and still owed $180 million. Why? Because the OPDA restructured the debt, extended terms, and added new loans for modernization. It was a perpetual debt machine. Pay forever, owe forever. The Ottoman people understood what was happening. They called the OPDA the General Debt Administration. But they had another name for it, the foreign occupation, because that's what it was, occupation without soldiers, colonization without conquest. The British didn't need to invade, they controlled the customs. The French didn't need to conquer, they controlled the taxes. The Germans didn't need to fight, they controlled the revenue. They had done something more efficient than war. They had turned the entire Ottoman economy into a debt extraction machine. Sultan Abdulhamid II, who ruled from 1876 to 1909, summed it up in his memoirs. I became Sultan of an empire, but I ruled over nothing. The Europeans controlled the money, and he who controls the money controls everything. He was a sultan in name, a prisoner in reality. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire was a corpse, still moving, still breathing, but dead inside. The economy was controlled by foreigners. The military was weak and outdated. The territories were shrinking every decade. The prestige was gone. The Young Turks, led by Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, had taken power in 1908. Their slogan was clear: save the empire, restore Ottoman pride. But how do you save an empire when foreigners control 30% of your revenue? Enver Pasha had a plan, a desperate, reckless, catastrophic plan. Join World War I, ally with Germany, win, renegotiate everything. The logic seemed sound. Germany was the strongest military power in Europe. If Germany won, they'd reshape the world order. The Ottomans could renegotiate the debt, kick out the OPDA, and reclaim sovereignty. It was the ultimate gamble, the final roll of the dice. August 1914. World War I began. November 1914. The Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The decision would destroy them. The Ottomans fought on 5 fronts: the Caucasus front against Russia, the Mesopotamia front against Britain in Iraq, the Sinai and Palestine front against Britain in Egypt and Palestine, Gallipoli against Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand, and the Arabian Peninsula against the Arab revolts supported by Britain. The cost of the war was devastating. 325,000 Ottoman soldiers were killed, 400,000 were wounded, 250,000 went missing or were captured, 200,000 civilians died from starvation and disease. The financial cost was incalculable. The economy collapsed. The OPDA stopped functioning as war disrupted trade. But that didn't help because now the Ottomans had no revenue at all. They printed money. The Ottoman lira collapsed. Inflation hit 1,000%. 1918. Total defeat, the Armistice of Mudros. Ottoman forces surrendered, the empire was finished. 1920, the Treaty of Sevres. The victorious allies carved up the Ottoman Empire. Greece took western Anatolia, Italy took southern Anatolia. France took southeastern Anatolia, which became Syria. Britain took Mesopotamia, which became Iraq and Palestine. Armenia got an independent state in eastern Anatolia. The Ottomans kept a small region around Ankara. The empire that once ruled 3 continents was reduced to a fragment, and the debt, still owed, now to the victors. Britain demanded payment, France demanded payment, Italy demanded payment. The Ottomans, now just a rump state, still owed £180 million. It was obscene, cruel, impossible, but then something unexpected happened. 1919, Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, landed in Samsun on the Black Sea coast. He was a military officer, a war hero, and he had a message: the Ottoman Empire is dead, but Turkey will live. He organized resistance, fought a war of independence against Greek, French, Italian, and Armenian forces. Against all odds, he won. 1923, the Republic of Turkey was declared. Ataturk became president. The European powers sent diplomats. Their message was direct: you must honor the Ottoman debt. Ataturk's response shocked them. No, the British ambassador protested. The debt is legal. It was signed by Ottoman sultans. Ataturk replied firmly, the sultans are gone, the empire is gone. We are not the Ottoman Empire, we are Turkey, and we owe you nothing. But international law, the ambassador began. Ataturk cut him off. International law did not protect us when you carved up our homeland. International law did not stop you from occupying our cities. Do not lecture me about law. The Europeans threatened sanctions, threatened military action. Ataturk didn't blink. Try it, we just fought for 4 years, we'll fight for 4 more if we must. The Europeans realized he meant it. Negotiations began, months of debate. The final agreement came in the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. Turkey agreed to pay 62% of the Ottoman debt, roughly £112 million. The remaining 38% was distributed among former Ottoman territories including Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. Why did Ataturk agree to pay 62%? Because it was the pragmatic choice. Complete refusal would mean eternal conflict. Partial payment bought recognition, peace, and independence. But here's the key. Turkey never paid the full amount. The Great Depression hit in 1929. Global trade collapsed. Turkey suspended payments. 1933. Turkey renegotiated and reduced the debt to £84 million. The 1950s brought another renegotiation with further reductions. By 1954, Turkey paid a final settlement of £27 million. The original debt was £242 million. The amount actually paid by Turkey was £27 million. That's 11% of the original debt. How did Ataturk do it? Simple. He understood leverage. He understood that empires are built on perception. The Ottomans acted weak, so they were treated weak. Ataturk acted strong, so he was treated strong. The Ottomans said, "We need loans, please help us." Ataturk said, "We owe nothing, try to collect." In international finance, confidence is everything. The Ottomans had none. Ataturk had nothing but confidence, and confidence won. You might think this is ancient history, irrelevant to today. You're wrong. The Ottoman story is repeating right now all around the world. 2024, global debt stands at $307 trillion. That's 336% of global GDP. The United States has $34 trillion in federal debt and spends $1.1 trillion on interest payments per year. That's more than the defense budget, more than Medicare. Interest is now the second largest budget item. Japan has a 264% debt to GDP ratio, the worst in the developed world, and pays 22% of its budget on interest. China has official debt of $14 trillion, but hidden local government debt adds another $13 trillion. The real estate sector is collapsing under debt. Greece in 2010 faced a debt crisis and couldn't pay. The EU and IMF provided a bailout with conditions including austerity, spending cuts, and tax increases. Greece lost economic sovereignty. Brussels controlled the budget. Sound familiar? It's the Ottoman OPDA in modern form. Argentina has defaulted 9 times in its history and currently owes $45 billion to the IMF. The IMF dictates economic policy. Sovereignty lost again. Sri Lanka in 2022 defaulted on external debt. The government collapsed, the president fled, an IMF bailout came with conditions attached. Lebanon in 2020 defaulted on debt. The currency collapsed, banks froze accounts, the economy shrank 40% in 2 years. Same pattern. Different era. The Ottomans borrowed for wars and prestige. We borrow for consumption and welfare. The Ottomans paid 70% of revenue to debt. The US pays 15% and it's rising. The Ottomans lost sovereignty to the OPDA. Greece lost sovereignty to the Troika, which includes the EU, ECB, and IMF. The mechanism is identical: borrow beyond your means, lose control, become a debt colony. And here's the worst part. Everyone thinks they're different, that they can manage it, that they'll grow out of the debt. The Ottomans thought that too. They thought they'd win the next war, they'd find new revenue, they'd reform the economy. They didn't, and they couldn't, because exponential math always wins. When your debt grows faster than your economy, there are only 3 outcomes. Default like Argentina, Greece, and the Ottoman Empire. Inflated away like Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Or austerity forever like Japan and Italy. All 3 options are terrible. And we're walking the same path, borrowing more every year, paying more interest every year, ignoring the warnings, because that's what empires do. They ignore warnings until it's too late. The Ottomans borrowed £242 million. It destroyed a 600-year empire. We're borrowing trillions. What do you think happens next? Ottoman Empire, 1299 to 1922. 623 years of history, 3 continents, dozens of sultans, millions of subjects, destroyed not by crusaders, not by Mongols, not by disease, by debt, a series of loans, each one small, each one manageable, each one fatal. They borrowed for wars, for modernization, for pride, for survival. And in the end they sold their empire one loan at a time. The Sultan became a puppet. Foreigners controlled the taxes. The people lost their sovereignty, and when they finally tried to fight back, it was too late. The empire was already dead. This is cinematic history tales, where empires fall, where economics kills, where history becomes cinema. If you want more stories like this, epic collapses, economic disasters, empires that destroyed themselves, hit subscribe. Because the lesson of the Ottomans is not complicated. Debt is a slow poison, sweet at first, deadly in the end. You don't feel it when you borrow, you feel it when you try to pay back, and by then you're no longer free. Next time, how Spain conquered the world, found mountains of gold, and went bankrupt anyway. The richest empire that died of its own wealth. See you then.